In recent programs, I've been talking about the 50th anniversary of the passing of notable Assyrians, and this includes George Lamza, who popularized the Aramaic Bible, the Peshitta Bible, made translations of it and commentaries, and also created awareness and knowledge of the Assyrian people, who they are. And of course, Mar Ishai Shamoun, who died 50 years ago as well. He was assassinated. He was the last patriarch, Catholicos patriarch of the Mar Shamoun line. And of course, there's been 3 patriarchs since him, Mar Dinka, Mar Georgis, and now Mar Awa. But 50 years ago, you had the end of a line of patriarchs that extends a family line, a dynasty that extended for 600 years. So there's another person, also of the Mar Shamoun family, who died 50 years ago this next month. And that is Lady Surma. As we recognize great men of the past, it's important for us also to recognize women of the past and their contributions. So let's take a look at the life and legacy of Lady Surma.
Jesus was an Aramaic-speaking Jew of the Middle East, and the Assyrians are Aramaic-speaking Christians in the Middle East who have endured persecution for over 1,000 years. Join Voice of the Word Aramaic Bible teacher, artist, and author Stephen Missick as he examines the Bible through the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times in which it was first revealed. Research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the Church to its Semitic roots. And now, Voice of the Word.
When I first visited an Assyrian church, and it was the one in Yonkers, New York, I was able to pick up a few books. I picked up a Aramaic New Testament, a book entitled By Foot to China, about the missions of the Assyrian church to the east to Mongolia and China. And I also got a copy of this book, and this is Assyrian Church Customs and the Murder of Mar Shamoun. This is Mar Benjamin Shamoun. And this is by his sister, Surma Debate Mar Shamoun. And this book has an introduction by the Archbishop of Canterbury. And the late 1800s, the early 1900s, the Anglican Church had like a mission to assist the Assyrian Church. And so they had friendly relations for a while between the Church of England and the Assyrian Church of the East. And we also have, this is W.A. Wingram, and he wrote a lot of books about the Assyrians. He's a lover of the Assyrian people and the Syriac Christian heritage, and he wrote several books. I believe I have at least one of his books, but I need to begin reading what he wrote. So what happened is kind of interesting. I was talking to another Assyrian, this has been years ago, and I mentioned this book, and they thought that she, Lady Surma, was a bad person. And this Assyrian said that Lady Surma was a bad person. One thing you need to understand about the Assyrian people is there's a lot of infighting among that community. But when we look at the Mar Shamoun family and Lady Surma, we should look at Lady Surma's contributions and judge her for what she did and what she said herself, instead of how people talk negatively about her. And you're going to find an Assyrian out there that's going to cast aspersions on other Assyrians. That's like an Assyrian national pastime, is just negativity and attacking other people. There's a lot of chiefs, too many chiefs, not enough Indians. And instead of being unified as a nation, we have these divisions that weaken the Assyrian nation, unfortunately. So let's look at Lady Surma was. I doubt this person really had much knowledge of who she is and what she did. Lady Surma Debate Mar Shamoun. She was born in 1883. She died in 1975. About 1 month after her nephew, the patriarch, passed away. I was reading about the death of the patriarch, and it's very interesting that he was murdered before he decided to return. He retired from official duties, and he decided he was going to return. So Mar Ishai Shamoun had decided to return to perform his duties as patriarch, and before he was able to do that, he was assassinated. Another thing is this is a cold-blooded murder, and it's probably part of a criminal conspiracy. So 50 years ago, in 1975, an Assyrian went up and shot and murdered the patriarch. And the murderer served his time in prison. And I was reading a book by Mar Akram of India, and at the time he wrote the book, the murderer was a free man, and he had fled to Canada, of all places. Which I think if you murder somebody, you should get the death penalty, or at the very least, life imprisonment. But this person murdered the patriarch, and then now he's free as a bird out there roaming around with the blood of the patriarch on his hands. Lady Surma was about 92 years old when she died. She was the sister of the Catholicos Patriarch of the Assyrian Church of the East, which was Marshamun Benjamin and Marshamun Pulis, her brothers. Then her brother, Pulis Marshamun, inherited the patriarch, and then he died during this great crisis. And then her nephew, this is Mar Ishai Shamun, then he inherited the patriarchy, and he was the last one to inherit the patriarchy. After that, they convened synods and the bishops chose who would be the patriarch. Lady Surma was born in Kuchanis in Harari, where she was educated by Reverend Brown of the Archbishop of Canterbury Mission, the Church of England to the Assyrian people. And under education by him, she became fluent in English. After the assassination of her brother by the Kurdish rebel Simco, and succeeded by his younger brother, after the assassination of her brother, Mar Benjamin Shamun, and after he was succeeded by his younger brother, this is Mar Shamun Polis, Surma Kanam, Lady Surma, practically became regent. Lady Surma was born in Kuchanis in Harari. She was educated by Reverend Brown of the Archbishop of Canterbury Mission. The Church of England had a mission to the Assyrian Christians, and Reverend Brown educated Lady Surma, and she became fluent in English. Her brother, the patriarch, and this is Mar Shamun Benjamin, he was assassinated by a Kurdish rebel named Simco. Then he's succeeded by his younger brother, this is Mar Shamun Pulis, who inherits the office of patriarch, which at this time is passed down through the family line. So one brother was killed, the next brother inherited the role. Then you had World War I, we had the genocide of the Assyrians, the Greeks, and the Armenians, and all this chaos and upheaval, disease became widespread as well. And unfortunately, the patriarch, this is Marshamun the 20th, Paulos, he became ill and died. So then Surma Khanan, Lady Surma, she becomes regent. She practically becomes, so basically the patriarch is sort of like a priest king of sorts, right? He's the religious leader, he's the patriarch, but he also has a role, a civil role, as the leader and the ruler of the Assyrian people. And since the patriarch who inherited Marshamun Pulis, it was just a 12-year-old little boy, this is going to be Mar Ishai Shamun, her nephew. So she steps in, Lady Surma, and she becomes the de facto ruler of the Assyrian people. So she practically became regent. In 1918, she was invited by the British authorities to present the Assyrian question in London. She also attended the Treaty of Versailles negotiations, probably as the only woman regent. Now, the Treaty of Versailles was a disaster that led to a lot of wars and conflicts that we're enduring and suffering with today. So World War I was over. The Germans assumed, they had this peace plan offered by President Wilson. They accepted it, but then they surrendered on the basis of Wilson's peace plan, but the British and the French says, we're not going by that. Then they called this big convention of nations at Versailles, and they hammered out the Treaty of Versailles, where the lines on the map of the Middle East were drawn, which have produced a lot of conflict, war, and disaster, because the lines they drew were in the interest of the British and the French. The French, they did not represent the demographic realities on the ground. And of course, the desire for the British and French to have a zone of influence, exploit that region for their own financial gain. And like I said, this was a disaster. But there was another woman in negotiations. This is Gertrude Bell, I believe her name was. And she was working for Islamist interests, a British woman named Gertrude Bell. But Lady Surma was there trying to advocate for the interest and the needs of the Assyrian people. But of course, the British Empire weren't concerned about the Assyrian people and left them weak and vulnerable, and the British brought a lot of evil on the Assyrian people. The descendants of the Assyrian Empire had lived as a semi-independent nation in the Hakkari Mountains, but they were massacred and driven out by the Ottomans and the Kurds in 1915. In return, they were promised an independent. The Assyrians fought for the Allies against Germany and the Ottoman Empire. For their services in fighting for the Allied powers, the Assyrians were promised a degree of autonomy or even a national homeland, but these were empty promises. So in return for their sacrifices and also suffering genocide, they were promised an independent homeland by the British, by France, and by Russia. But in 1918, northern Iraq, the Mosul district, this is what they were promised, but the promise was not fulfilled. As I mentioned, Marpulis died of tuberculosis in 1920, and he was succeeded by his 12-year-old nephew, Marashai Shamoun III, who was also assassinated. But he was assassinated in 1975, not by the historic enemy of the Assyrian people, the Kurds, but by a brother Assyrian, shot and murdered the patriarch, which I believe is part of a wider criminal conspiracy. But Marashai Shamoun served as patriarch for about 50 years. When Marashai went to school in England until 1927, she assisted the metropolitans, which is a type of bishop, Mar Josip Kanishu of Rustaka, in church affairs, and she was in charge of secular affairs together with her brother. She's assisting in church affairs, and she was in charge of secular affairs together with her brother, General David Mar Shamoun, the father of the patriarch. General David Mar Shamoun was the father of Mar Ishai. She continued to act as a consultant throughout Mar Ishai's life, given her temporal and secular expertise. At the time of the disturbances in 1933 in Iraq, this is the Sameli massacre, where the forces of the Kingdom of Iraq, the Hashemite Kingdom of Iraq, and the Iraqi army carried out a massacre. They were machine gunning Assyrians to death. And once again, the British betrayed and worked against the Assyrians to harm them by forcing the patriarch, he's a victim of these terrible circumstances, but they forced the patriarch into exile. So the British people, the British government has been probably the most forceful enemy of the Assyrian people in their history. They feigned friendship, and then when there's crisis and need arose, they didn't stab the Assyrians in the back, they stabbed in the front, looked them right in the eye and just stabbed them. And England still is doing things like this. In Nigeria, we have all these terrible massacres of Christians, hundreds of thousands of Christians being massacred. And around 40, 50 years ago, the Christians of Nigeria, to preserve their safety and their lives and to prevent these massacres from happening, they decided perhaps the Christians of Nigeria should break away from the Islamic region for their own safety and security and to form an independent nation of Biafra. The English did everything. They even starved people out and committed atrocities against the Nigerians, because, and even right now, England, in England today, if you criticize Islam, you could be arrested, like Tommy Robinson. But if you're going to preach jihad and incite violence, you're free to do that in England. Radical Islam is tolerated in England, but if you criticize in any way, it happens. They've arrested people in England Christians for praying silently. They kick down people's doors in the middle of the night for posting something critical of Islam on social media. England's in a lot of trouble right now, and some of these problems and troubles they brought on themselves. So, Lady Surma continued to act as a consultant throughout Marshai's life, given her temporal and secular expertise. So she was always a counselor, a mentor, and advisor towards Marshai Shamoun throughout his entire life. from childhood until his assassination. And she lived probably, I mean, she's an older woman, right, at 92 years old, but probably the sorrow of seeing her nephew brutally murdered in such a way and the outrage committed against him by an Assyrian probably hastened her demise. As I was reading, at the time of the disturbances in 1933 in Iraq, the patriarchal family were forced into exile into Cyprus, where they remained until 1952, when they moved to England and finally settled in the United States in 1960, thanks to a law enacted by Congress and signed by the President. She died in the year 1975, a month after her nephew died, in Turlock, California. She wrote this book about the Assyrian church and culture and the experiences of the Great War and the death of her brother. And it's like people are so prone to criticism, right? And some of these Assyrians, who are the worst critics, the most negative and hostile people, it's like, well, what have you done for the Assyrian cause, right? She was in the thick of it. When these genocides were going on, she was there trying to provide leadership under very difficult circumstances. A woman, she's like a Semiramis, right? What happened with Semiramis? Semiramis was the Assyrian queen. There was no male heir. You know, it's just the same thing. The new Assyrian emperor was a child. Queen Semiramis had to step up and rule Assyria until her son, the crown prince, reached maturity and was able to assume rule. She did the same thing. She was providing leadership over the church and also the Assyrian nation during a time of great crisis. So these people who attack and criticize her, I'm not saying she's a perfect person. We all have our flaws. If we're going to judge people, we should judge people on their own merits and not listening to people gainsaying and running people down all the time like some Assyrians are apt to do. So let's look at Lady Surma, right? So her brother, the patriarch, is murdered. Then her other brother becomes patriarch in a time of crisis and in a time of crisis, massacres, death, disease. He's stricken down by disease. And then what happens? The next heir apparent to the role of patriarch is a 12-year-old boy. So she has to step up, and she's a leader of the Assyrian people. She's kind of like, this is shocking, but in a way it's true. She's like a de facto acting patriarch, in a sense, a female patriarch. That seems like, that could have been, that's also part of the reason why they decided to kill Marashai Shamun, because I think earlier in the Assyrian church history, there was talk about married priests, married bishops, and even a married patriarch, but that had not been the practice in a long time. If Mar-Ishai Shamun reassumed his authority as patriarch, he would have entered in that office as a married patriarch, something that the early Assyrian church fathers talked about and discussed as being valid, but wasn't actually done. So it would have been, in a sense, even though these ideas were explored earlier in Assyrian church history, to my knowledge, it wasn't actually done, and he was about to do it, a married patriarch. And they killed him before it happened, before he was able to actually exert his authority as patriarch, again, as a married patriarch. They murdered him. So here you have a woman. Now, Jesus chose 12 disciples. Jesus had female disciples as well. But I think that it's the will of God for men to assert leadership over the church. But, you know, we had, Junia, the apostle, Mary Magdalene. Women sometimes have played an important role in the church. It shouldn't be overlooked. I'm sure Lady Surma did not behave in any way appropriately. She technically was not the patriarch, right? Even though Marashai was a boy at 12 years old, the official duties were performed by him under her advice and counsel. So, the other thing is like people casting aspersions on her. It's like, what have you done as an Assyrian? You're sitting there just going around insulting people all the time, sitting in your lazy insulting people. That's all you can do. What does she do? She advocated for the Assyrian people at this conference at Versailles. Well, the British had decided to... Russia was out of the picture because Russia fell to communism. If Russia was there, perhaps it would have been different. And the British had already decided that they were just going to throw the Assyrian people under the bus, no matter what. And she could have been up there advocating for the Assyrian cause very eloquently, and it wouldn't have mattered. The British decided that what they're going to do, they're going to throw aside the Assyrian people and abandon them to a dark fate. The British had decided to do that for their own purposes and just for their own gain, to betray trusts like that. So then Lady Surma experienced exile. And this is also an important part of the history of the Assyrian Church of the East. And if you're going to cast aspersions against people, you should at least look at what she did. You know, that's what they do. They don't know anything about Lady Surma. They haven't read her book. They haven't looked at what she did. She did a lot more than these people that talk bad about her did, right? I mean, she was out there advocating for Assyrians as best as she could under bad circumstances. What have you done? What have you done? During a time of war, turmoil, massacres, genocide, death and disease, she tried to lead. She did. She led the Assyrian people as best as she could under very bad circumstances. And she suffered for it. She suffered for it. She saw herself forced into exile. And then, you know, her nephew, who she led his whole life, she was a mother to him. She sees what is in a way her own, not biological, but it's her nephew, like her own son, brutally murdered, a month before that. Like I said, that probably is something that contributed to her death, the grief and sorrow of seeing this national tragedy and shame that the patriarch was murdered like that. So I'm reading different books right now. This is not a long book, and Reverend Wigram is a very important friend and scholar and who wrote extensively about the Assyrian people. So I have skimmed through this book before, but I'm going to sit down and carefully read it in its entirety. So this book is readily available. I think I found my original copy of this, but I was given another copy by the Marshamoon family. And then we have this as well, The History of the Patriarchal Succession of the Marshamoon family, where we have the family trees in here. So, let's remember George Slamza, let's remember Marashai Shamoon, but let's also remember Lady Surma and her contributions and sacrifices as we approach the 50th anniversary of her death. I think it's right, appropriate, and fitting for us to look upon her life and her contributions, and also, her role in important events in Assyrian Christian history. So let's not overlook the sacrifices and contributions that Lady Surma made for the Assyrian church and the Assyrian nation.